James stood in front of the grandiose art gallery, clutching his portfolio tightly in his hands. The building's sleek, modern exterior gleamed in the sunlight, its glass walls reflecting the sky like a polished mirror. It was a sight to behold, an institution of culture and wealth, where only the most renowned artists had their works displayed. It was also the kind of place where dreams either came true or were shattered in a single moment. He had been here before, just to observe. The sharp suits, the elegant conversations about technique and style, the high-profile critics and collectors walking through the halls, it had all felt like a distant world, one he could only dream of being a part of. But today was different. Today, he had decided to take the plunge. Today, he was going to show his work, to take that first step toward being noticed. James had heard whispers about this particular gallery, known for its exclusivity and its disdain for anything too unrefined or experimental. But he had something to prove, and no matter how intimidating it felt, he wasn't about to back down. With a deep breath, James pushed open the door and stepped inside. The gallery was everything he had imagined and more. It was vast, with white walls stretching up toward the high ceilings, each space carefully curated to highlight the art that hung there. The floor was polished marble, and the air had that distinct smell of a place where money and culture intertwined. The lights were soft, casting a glowing halo around each painting, each sculpture, each piece as if it were the center of the universe. James's heart raced as he walked past the first few exhibitions. He had been carefully planning this moment for months. He had worked tirelessly in his small studio, creating pieces that were bold, raw, and unlike anything anyone had ever seen before. His style was inspired by his family's long tradition of artistry but was also deeply personal. He wasn't just painting what he saw, he was painting what he felt, what he had lived, what his ancestors had passed down. The work was emotional, textured, and spoke to an age-old connection to culture and identity. But would they see it that way? Would they understand? At the front desk, a sharply dressed receptionist looked up and smiled, a practiced, professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She seemed to expect him, but James couldn't shake the feeling that he was out of place. This was a world that didn't usually welcome people like him, young, black, and without the pedigree of the established artists that often adorned these walls. But he had been invited, and his art had caught the attention of someone important. Someone with a reputation for discovering rising stars. His fingers tingled with nervous excitement as he handed over his portfolio. The receptionist barely glanced at it. She simply nodded, gesturing toward a large, open room at the far end of the gallery. "Mr. Victor will be in the back. He's expecting you," she said, her voice clipped and businesslike. James nodded, forcing himself to stay calm, but the reality of what he was about to do weighed heavily on him. He followed the receptionist's direction, walking down a corridor that was decorated with paintings that were rich in color and history, each one capturing a different world of artistic expression. But as he moved deeper into the gallery, a sense of unease crept up on him. The air grew colder, and the sleekness of the space began to feel almost oppressive. He finally reached a set of double doors, behind which he could hear the low hum of voices. The doors opened before he had a chance to knock, revealing a tall, middle-aged man in a perfectly tailored suit. The man's sharp eyes scanned James up and down, and for a moment, James felt like a specimen under the microscope. He was standing before Victor Devereux, the gallery owner, a man whose name was synonymous with exclusivity, taste, and high-end art curation. "Ah, you must be James," Victor said with a smooth smile, his voice dripping with condescension. "I've heard quite a bit about you." James took a deep breath and extended his hand, trying to maintain his composure. "Yes, I'm James. It's an honor to meet you." Victor didn't shake his hand immediately. Instead, he motioned to a set of sleek leather chairs arranged around a glass table. "Please, sit down. I'll have a look at what you brought." James took a seat, his heart pounding. He unzipped his portfolio and carefully placed the first painting on the table, an abstract piece that combined vivid splashes of red and gold, a representation of human struggle and resilience. Victor didn't look at the painting immediately. He glanced at it briefly, before his eyes returned to James. "So, tell me about your work," Victor said, his tone patronizing. James cleared his throat, trying to steady his nerves. "My work explores themes of identity, culture, and history. It's about connecting with what's been lost and rediscovering the strength in what's been overlooked. The pieces reflect a journey, both personal and collective." Victor raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. He leaned back in his chair, studying the piece more intently, but the sneer on his face told James everything he needed to know. Victor said, his voice dripping with disdain. It's certainly bold. But I don't think it's the kind of work we're looking for here. It lacks sophistication, refinement. The colors are loud, the forms are, chaotic. It's not exactly the kind of thing that would appeal to our collectors." James's stomach twisted, but he kept his face neutral. He had heard words like these before, they were nothing new. But they still stung. He had poured his heart into these pieces, hoping they would speak for themselves. Yet here was Victor, the self-proclaimed authority on art, telling him that his expression wasn't worthy of being seen. "Perhaps you should consider another gallery," Victor continued. "One that specializes in more, shall we say, experimental art. This, unfortunately, doesn't meet the high standards we have here." Victor's words were like daggers, and they cut through James more deeply than he wanted to admit. His dreams of having his work displayed in a gallery like this seemed to crumble in an instant. But he couldn't let Victor see how much it hurt. He simply nodded, gathering his portfolio, fighting the lump in his throat. "I appreciate your time," James said, standing up. "Thank you for looking at my work." Victor barely looked up from his desk as he waved dismissively. "Good luck with everything," he muttered, already turning his attention to a stack of papers. James exited the gallery with a mixture of anger and disappointment swirling inside him. He had been dismissed, yet again. He had always known that the art world could be unforgiving, but this sting felt different. This was personal. He had walked into the gallery with hope, but left with only the cold reality of rejection. But little did Victor know, James was far from finished. This rejection would only fuel him further, driving him to rise above the dismissive attitudes of people like Victor. He had a vision, and he wasn't about to let it die here. The art world may have closed its doors on him today, but James would find a way to open them again. As he walked away, he made a silent promise to himself, the world would see his art, whether it was in this gallery or on his own terms. James walked aimlessly through the city streets, his mind clouded with the sting of Victor's rejection. The cold air did nothing to ease his frustration, and his hands trembled slightly as he adjusted the strap of his bag. He didn't know where he was going, but he couldn't bring himself to return home just yet. His small apartment was filled with the echo of failure, and he needed space to think, to gather himself. His footsteps led him to a park, an old, quiet place where he often came when he needed to clear his mind. The park was a sanctuary in the midst of the bustling city, a place where he could escape the weight of the world and remember who he was before the demands of society crept in. He sat on a bench beneath a large oak tree, the wind rustling through the leaves above him. It was here, in moments like this, that James found the clarity he needed to continue on. As he sat there, his thoughts drifted back to the years that had led him to this point. His journey hadn't been easy, and the road had often felt lonely. Growing up in a small neighborhood on the outskirts of the city, James had always known he was different. While other kids played video games or hung out at the mall, he spent his time drawing. His father, a former artist who had fallen on hard times, had taught him to see the world through the lens of creativity. His father's art was once revered in their community, his paintings filled with intricate details that told stories of their ancestors, their struggles, and their triumphs. But as time passed, the world moved on, and his father's work became forgotten, cast aside by the art establishment that valued new trends over old traditions. James had inherited his father's love for painting, but also the burden of being overlooked. He never quite fit into the traditional art world. His work was too emotional, too personal, and too deeply connected to his heritage for the mainstream to understand. The pieces he created were raw and unrefined, capturing the beauty of his culture and history in ways that few artists dared to explore. But they didn't fit neatly into the narrow definitions of art that galleries like Victor's upheld. They were too bold, too loud, and to many, too controversial. Growing up, James had seen firsthand the prejudice his father faced. He remembered the times they would go to galleries, hoping to show off his father's work, only to be met with cold stares and dismissive gestures. His father would shrug it off, telling James that the world would one day recognize the worth of their heritage. "Don't let them define what your art is worth," his father would say. "Your art comes from your heart, and that's something no one can take from you." But James didn't fully understand what his father meant until now. He had spent years doubting himself, questioning whether his work was good enough to be noticed. Victor's dismissal had stung. But it had also sparked something within him. Perhaps it was time to embrace his art for what it was and stop trying to fit into a mold that wasn't made for him. As James sat there, lost in thought, an old man approached the bench. His skin was weathered by time, his back slightly hunched, but his eyes sparkled with a quiet wisdom. James recognized him immediately as Mr. Jackson, a local historian and artist who had known his father. Mr. Jackson had been a close friend to his family, often visiting their home and speaking of the old ways, the traditions, and the powerful connection between art and history. "James," Mr. Jackson said warmly, sitting down beside him. "I thought I might find you here." James smiled faintly. "I needed some air, Mr. Jackson. Just thinking about everything." "I know," Mr. Jackson said, nodding. "I heard about your meeting with Victor. I'm sure it didn't go the way you hoped." James sighed, looking down at his hands. "It didn't. He didn't even give my work a real chance. He just dismissed it." "Ah, the art world," Mr. Jackson said with a soft chuckle. "Full of the self-important and the narrow-minded. But you know what? You're not like them, James. Your art isn't meant for people like Victor. It's meant for something greater." James turned to face him, a question in his eyes. "What do you mean?" Mr. Jackson leaned back against the bench, his eyes distant as he spoke. "Your father, may he rest in peace, was a great man. And you, James, you carry his legacy. But there's more to your art than just your family history. Do you know the full story of your father's work? The real story?" James frowned, confused. "I know he painted the history of our people, the struggles they went through. But..." No, you're missing the bigger picture," Mr. Jackson interrupted gently. "Your father's work wasn't just about the past. He was tapping into something much older. Something ancient." James felt a chill run down his spine. "What are you talking about?" Mr. Jackson smiled, a knowing smile. "I've been studying the old texts, the ones passed down through generations. They speak of something, of a hidden connection between your family's art and an ancient culture. A culture that existed long before the world knew of its existence." "Your father's paintings?" "They weren't just personal stories. They were records, symbols, and references to a long-forgotten past. There's a secret buried in those paintings, James. A secret that links your family to the ancient scriptures, to the history that the world has long overlooked." James stared at him, unable to comprehend what he was hearing. "You mean, my father's paintings weren't just about his own experiences?" "Exactly," Mr. Jackson said. "He was channeling something greater, something ancient. And now, it's time for you to do the same. Your art, James, isn't just about expressing yourself. It's about revealing truths the world isn't ready to hear. But they need to. They need to understand the power of what you carry." James's mind raced as he processed Mr. Jackson's words. Could it be true? Had his father been trying to tell the world something far more significant than he had ever realized? Was his art, his style, a key to unlocking something ancient and powerful? His fingers itched to pick up a paintbrush, to revisit the pieces he had created, to see them through this new lens. But there was something else, something James hadn't considered before. If his art was truly connected to this ancient secret, what would it mean for him? What kind of power would he be wielding? And what would people like Victor, who only saw art as a commodity, think when they realized the truth? There's a lot you need to learn, Mr. Jackson said, his voice soft but urgent. And I think you're ready to understand it now. But be careful, James. The world isn't ready for what you have. And when they see it, they might try to silence you. James nodded slowly, feeling a fire igniting inside him. The art world might have rejected him today, but he wasn't going to stop. His father's legacy, the ancient knowledge embedded in his paintings, it was all part of something bigger than he had ever imagined. He was on the verge of something monumental, and he couldn't back down now. Thank you, Mr. Jackson, James said, his voice steady with newfound resolve. I'm going to find out everything I can. I'm going to make them see. Mr. Jackson smiled, his eyes filled with pride. I know you will. And when you do, the world won't be able to look away. The days following his conversation with Mr. Jackson were a blur. James had always been an intense worker, but now, there was a fire inside him that pushed him forward in ways he couldn't explain. He returned to his studio with a renewed sense of purpose, sketching, painting, and experimenting with new forms and techniques. He began revisiting the work that had been dismissed so easily, examining each piece with a fresh perspective, looking for hidden meanings and connections to the ancient wisdom Mr. Jackson had spoken of. James' studio, a modest space in a small apartment building, had always been his sanctuary. It was filled with canvases, sketches, and paint-splattered walls. But now, as he worked, the space felt alive. The paintings began to speak to him in ways they hadn't before. What had once been chaotic splashes of color and form started to reveal themselves as something deeper, symbols, stories, and messages he couldn't yet fully comprehend. His work was changing, becoming something more than just personal expression. It was tapping into something ancient, something universal. At night, James pored over old texts that Mr. Jackson had lent him, studying the scriptures and writings that spoke of a lost civilization and its connection to the art his family had created. The ancient culture described in these texts was one of profound knowledge, where art and history were intertwined in a way that transcended time and space. The more James read, the more he realized that his father had known something that few people could understand, something that could not be easily articulated in words, but could only be conveyed through the visual language of art. It was in this deep dive into the past that James uncovered a startling revelation. His father's paintings were not just representations of historical events or cultural struggles. They contained encoded messages, hidden references to a far older civilization that had once thrived and then vanished, leaving behind only traces of their existence in the form of ancient scripts and symbols. And it was in these symbols, these subtle details, that James saw the key to understanding his true potential as an artist. Despite his growing excitement, James remained cautious. He knew that revealing the true meaning behind his art could change everything, but he also understood that the world might not be ready for such a revelation. He wasn't sure how to proceed, but he knew one thing for certain: he had to share this discovery. The question was, who could he trust? It wasn't long before an answer came, albeit in a way James hadn't anticipated. One afternoon, while he was working in his studio, a knock came at the door. He wasn't expecting anyone, so he hesitated before answering. When he opened it, he was surprised to find a woman standing there, holding a briefcase. She was dressed in an expensive coat and wore dark sunglasses, despite the cloudy day. There was something about her presence that exuded authority and purpose. "James Williams?" she asked, her voice smooth but firm. "That's me," he replied cautiously. "Can I help you?" The woman smiled, a knowing smile that seemed to have an edge of intrigue. "I hope so," she said. "My name is Olivia Dawson. I'm an art critic, and I've been following your work for some time. I think you and I have a lot to discuss." James blinked, surprised. Art critics were not the people he expected to show up at his door. "I'm not sure I understand," he said slowly. "I haven't shown my work publicly yet." Olivia chuckled softly. "Oh, I know. But your work, James, it's been creating quite a stir behind the scenes. You may not realize it, but there are some very influential people who have taken notice. Your art has caught the attention of a collector I know, someone with deep pockets and a serious appreciation for bold, unique expressions of culture. He believes your work holds something important, something beyond the art world's usual boundaries. James felt a rush of excitement mixed with wariness. Who is this collector? He asked, trying to keep his voice steady. That's not the most important part, Olivia said, lowering her sunglasses to reveal sharp, perceptive eyes. The important part is that your work has the potential to change the way the world thinks about art. It's not just about selling paintings. It's about revealing a truth that's been hidden for centuries. James froze. This woman knew about the ancient messages in his paintings. Somehow, she knew. What do you mean? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Olivia's eyes gleamed as she leaned in closer. I've done my homework, James. I know about the references in your work to ancient civilizations. I know about the cultural significance of the symbols your father used, and I know that they're not just random. They're pieces of a puzzle that, when put together, will unlock something the world isn't ready for. But I'm telling you, James, it's time for that truth to be seen. And I'm offering you a chance to make that happen. James took a step back, his mind spinning. He had been cautious about revealing the true meaning behind his art, but here was someone, an art critic, no less, who not only understood his work but seemed to be urging him to share it with the world. She wasn't dismissing him, she was offering him an opportunity. But the weight of what she was asking felt heavy, and James didn't want to rush into anything he didn't fully understand. Why are you here? James asked, his voice steady but with a hint of suspicion. What's in it for you? Olivia smiled again, but this time the smile was more subtle, almost mysterious. I'm here because I believe in your work, James. And I believe that the world needs to hear what you have to say. As for what's in it for me, let's just say I have a few connections. If you choose to take the leap, I can help you navigate the world of high-end collectors, critics, and galleries. But this isn't just about business. This is about the art. This is about history. This is about legacy. James felt a sudden surge of uncertainty. Could he trust her? Could he trust anyone in this cutthroat world of art? And yet, something in his gut told him that Olivia was telling the truth. She was offering him a chance to share the secrets of his paintings with the world, and that chance might never come again. After a long pause, James spoke. What do you want me to do? Olivia's smile widened. I want you to show the world what your father started. I want you to take the pieces that you've been creating and bring them into the light. And when you do, I want to be there to help guide you through it. I'll help you get your work into the hands of people who understand its value. People who can see the importance of what you're creating. James stared at her, considering her words. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment when everything could change. The decision was his, and it felt monumental. But there was something undeniable about the way Olivia spoke, the way she saw his work. She wasn't just another critic, she was someone who understood what James was trying to say through his art. All right, James said finally, his voice filled with determination. Let's do it. Let's show the world what they've been missing. The weeks following James' agreement with Olivia were a whirlwind of activity. The decision to publicly unveil his father's art in its truest form, to reveal the ancient messages woven into each brushstroke, set into motion a series of events that he had never anticipated. James dove headfirst into preparing for the exhibition. With Olivia's help, he began curating a selection of pieces that represented the evolution of his father's work and the new direction his own art was taking. They worked tirelessly, gathering paintings, sketches, and ancient artifacts that tied together the hidden symbols and references to the lost civilization. Olivia proved to be a valuable ally. She introduced James to some of the most influential figures in the art world, gallery owners, critics, and private collectors who had the power to shape the future of his career. But as much as Olivia pushed James to step into the limelight, the artist still hesitated. He was afraid of what revealing the full extent of his father's hidden messages might mean. This wasn't just about art anymore, it was about exposing a truth that had been buried for centuries. Despite his concerns, James couldn't ignore the pull of destiny. The pieces were falling into place, and he knew that he had a responsibility to carry out the mission his father had started. The hidden knowledge that had been passed down through generations was now his to share, and he couldn't turn his back on it. The exhibition was scheduled for the following month, and the venue was one of the most prestigious galleries in the city, a location that was frequented by the elite of the art world. As the opening night approached, James found himself filled with a mix of excitement and anxiety. The art world could be brutal, and there was always the risk that his work would be dismissed or misunderstood, but this time felt different. For the first time, he wasn't trying to fit into their mold, he was bringing something completely new, something that no one had seen before. The night of the exhibition arrived, and the gallery was filled with the hum of anticipation. Guests in formal attire mingled, sipping wine and discussing the works on display. James stood by the entrance, his heart pounding in his chest as he observed the crowd. Olivia was by his side, expertly navigating the social scene and introducing him to important collectors who had shown interest in his work. But James was distracted. He couldn't focus on the conversations or the potential buyers. His mind kept drifting back to the ancient knowledge he had uncovered, the deeper meaning behind his father's paintings, and the implications of sharing that knowledge with the world. The gallery was filled with his father's artwork, each piece a window into a long-forgotten past. And then there were the new works, his own pieces that seemed to resonate with a power he couldn't fully explain. Each brushstroke seemed to hold a message, a call to those who were willing to listen. As the guests wandered through the gallery, James watched their reactions closely. Some people seemed intrigued, examining the paintings with a careful, almost reverent air, while others appeared confused, unsure of what they were seeing. But then something remarkable happened. One of the more influential critics, a man named Jonathan Hayes, approached James with a look of intense curiosity. Hayes was known for his sharp eye and his ability to spot art that was truly groundbreaking. He had a reputation for being brutally honest, often dismissing entire exhibitions in a single sentence. So when he approached James with an expression of wonder, James felt a flicker of hope. "Mr. Williams," Hayes said, extending a hand, "I have to admit, I've never seen anything like this before. These works of yours, they're unlike anything I've encountered in years. What exactly is going on here?" James took a deep breath. This was the moment he had been waiting for, the moment to explain everything. "It's a story," he said, his voice steady. "It's a story that my father started telling through his art. The paintings aren't just about our history, they're about something much older. Something that's been lost to time. My father didn't just paint pictures of our people's struggles, he painted symbols, coded messages, that connect us to an ancient civilization. And now, through my own work, I'm continuing that story." Hayes raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued but still skeptical. "Ancient civilization? What exactly are you talking about?" James gestured to one of the paintings that depicted a large, intricately designed symbol, the one that had been the key to unlocking his father's hidden messages. "This symbol," he said, pointing to the painting, "it represents a connection between our people and a long-lost civilization. A civilization that predates even the most ancient cultures known to man. These symbols, they were passed down through my family, hidden in the art, until now." Hayes studied the painting closely, his expression shifting from curiosity to fascination. "I've never seen anything like this," he murmured. "The craftsmanship, the detail, it's unlike anything the art world has seen in decades. You're telling me these symbols have been hiding in plain sight?" James nodded. "Yes. And it's time the world understood their significance. There's a truth here that needs to be revealed. My father knew it, and now, it's my responsibility to share it." Hayes looked at James for a long moment, as if weighing his words carefully. Finally, he spoke, his voice filled with a sense of awe. This is something important. You're not just an artist, Mr. Williams. You're a historian, a messenger. I can see it now, the depth of what you've created. And I'm not the only one who's noticing. James' heart raced as he realized what Hayes was saying. This wasn't just a passing interest, this was the beginning of something monumental. People were beginning to understand the depth of his work, and that understanding was spreading like wildfire. The exhibition was no longer just a display of art, it had become a cultural event, a revelation. Over the next few hours, more influential figures began to approach James, each one offering their thoughts on his work. Some were collectors, eager to purchase his paintings, while others were academics and historians, fascinated by the hidden meanings behind the art. Olivia moved through the crowd with a look of quiet satisfaction, knowing that the seeds of something extraordinary were being planted. But as the night wore on, James' attention was drawn to one figure in particular. At the far end of the gallery stood an older man, dressed in an elegant suit, with a face that seemed familiar. There was something about him that intrigued James, something about his presence that felt different from the others. The man's eyes locked onto James, and he began making his way across the room. As he approached, James' heart skipped a beat. He knew this man, he had seen him in the old photographs of his father's studio. This man was a key figure from his father's past, someone who had been involved in the secret history James was only beginning to understand. James Williams, the man said, his voice low but filled with recognition. I've been waiting for this moment for a long time. James swallowed, his mind racing. Who was this man? And what did he know about his father's legacy? James' heart raced as the older man approached. His presence was commanding, and his sharp eyes seemed to pierce through James as if he were trying to read his very soul. The man was well dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of wealth and sophistication, but there was something about his demeanor that made him seem out of place in the modern world. He looked like someone who belonged to another time, someone who had seen history unfold firsthand. James swallowed hard, trying to steady his nerves. He had seen this man before, in old photographs his father had kept hidden in dusty boxes. But back then, he hadn't understood the significance of those pictures. Now, with the exhibition in full swing, and the mystery of his father's work beginning to unravel, he had a sinking feeling that this man was somehow tied to everything, his father's secrets, the ancient symbols, and the art that had changed the course of his life. Mr. Williams, the man said, his voice deep and steady. It's been a long time since I've seen someone carrying the torch. James blinked in confusion. I'm sorry, do I know you? The man smiled faintly. Not yet. But your father and I were acquainted. My name is Charles Davenport. The name struck James like a bolt of lightning. Davenport. His father had mentioned him in passing on rare occasions, always with an air of reverence, never explaining fully who he was or what role he had played in their family's history. James had always assumed Davenport was just another collector, another wealthy individual who had supported his father's art. But now, standing face to face with him, James realized there was far more to the story than he had ever known. You knew my father? James asked, trying to keep his voice steady. I knew him very well, Davenport replied, his eyes glinting with an emotion James couldn't quite place. In fact, I was the one who helped him understand the true purpose of his art. Your father was a brilliant man, James, but he was also a man who struggled with what he had uncovered. The secrets in his paintings, they're not just artistic expression. They're a map, a key to something far older than anything you can imagine. And now, it's your turn to take up that mantle. James felt his pulse quicken. A map? A key? This was the moment he had feared, a moment when everything his father had left behind would be laid bare, and James would be forced to confront the truth. But he wasn't sure he was ready. There were too many questions, too many unanswered mysteries. And yet, there was something in Davenport's words that resonated deep within him. His father had always known there was more to the paintings than met the eye, and now James was learning that the art wasn't just about history, it was about something larger, something bigger than they could possibly understand. Why are you here now? James asked, his voice tinged with both curiosity and caution. What do you want from me? Davenport's expression softened, and for the first time, his voice carried a note of sincerity. "I've been waiting for this moment, James. Your father and I worked together on something that was supposed to be revealed to the world when the time was right. The time has come, and it's up to you to finish what we started." James took a step back, his mind spinning. "I don't understand," he muttered. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" Davenport glanced around the gallery, his eyes scanning the crowd before returning to James. "Your father's paintings contain more than just hidden symbols. They contain a map to an ancient civilization, a civilization that existed long before any known cultures. The truth is, your father was part of a secret society, one that had access to forbidden knowledge. And he left clues for you, clues that only someone with his bloodline could decode." James felt the floor shift beneath him. A secret society? Forbidden knowledge? This was beyond anything he had imagined. His father, the quiet, introverted artist, had been involved in something so much bigger than he could have ever realized. And now, it seemed, the responsibility had fallen on him to uncover the truth. "You're saying that my father was part of a society that had access to lost knowledge?" James asked incredulously. "That's exactly what I'm saying," Davenport replied. "Your father wasn't just an artist, he was a keeper of secrets. And the art he created was his way of preserving and passing down that knowledge. But the time is running out, James. There are others who want to find this knowledge, and they'll stop at nothing to get it. If we don't act quickly, it could all be lost again." James' mind was racing, trying to make sense of the enormity of what Davenport was saying. His father, who had always been so focused on his art, had also been hiding a legacy that could change the course of history. And now, James had to take up the mantle and protect it from those who would exploit it. I don't know if I'm ready for this," James admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "You don't have a choice," Davenport said, his tone firm but not unkind. "You're the heir to your father's legacy, whether you're ready or not. But I'll help you. I'll guide you through it." James felt a wave of unease wash over him. How could he possibly be ready for something so monumental? How could he, a mere artist, take on the responsibility of safeguarding ancient knowledge? And yet, deep down, he knew there was no turning back. His father had entrusted him with this knowledge, and it was up to him to finish what had been started. "I don't know where to begin," James confessed, feeling a sense of dread settle over him. Davenport placed a hand on his shoulder, his grip surprisingly strong. "We start with what your father left behind. The symbols, the hidden messages in his art, they're the key. But we also need to be careful. There are people out there who would do anything to get their hands on what your father discovered." James felt the weight of the situation press down on him. The art that had once been a way for him to express himself and his father's legacy was now a map to something much greater. And it was up to him to protect it. The question was, who could he trust? Before he could respond, Olivia appeared beside them, her sharp eyes flicking between James and Davenport. "Everything okay?" she asked, her voice laced with concern. James nodded, though he wasn't sure he believed it himself. "I think so. But there's a lot more to this than I realized." Olivia's eyes narrowed as she looked at Davenport, a knowing expression crossing her face. "I see. You've met Charles Davenport." James glanced at her, confused. "You know him?" Olivia didn't answer immediately. Instead, she glanced at Davenport, who was watching her closely. Then she turned to James, her voice steady. "I know enough. And I know that whatever is happening now, it's only the beginning. But you're not alone in this, James. You have people who will help you, if you choose to trust them." James looked from Olivia to Davenport, trying to make sense of everything that was happening. The weight of his father's legacy felt heavier than ever before, but he knew that the journey ahead would be unlike anything he had ever experienced. "I'm ready," James said, his voice filled with determination. "Let's uncover the truth." The days that followed James' fateful conversation with Charles Davenport were a blur. His entire world seemed to have shifted, and with it came a flood of new responsibilities, uncertainties, and dangers. He found himself thrust into a situation that was far more complex and dangerous than he had ever imagined, but despite the fear gnawing at his insides, he couldn't turn away. His father's art had been a key to unlocking an ancient mystery, and now James had to find a way to decipher it, before others did. Davenport, despite his cryptic words, had proven to be an invaluable ally. He wasn't just a relic of the past, he was a man who knew the value of the secrets James now held, and he had made it clear that he was determined to see the mission through. However, Davenport's involvement had come with an unspoken warning. There were others who knew about the ancient knowledge hidden within James' father's artwork, and they would stop at nothing to acquire it. James, ever the skeptic, hadn't fully grasped the severity of the situation until one evening, just a few days after the exhibition, when the first sign of danger came knocking at his door. It was an ordinary evening. James had just finished a late dinner when the knock came. At first, he thought it might be Olivia, returning after her meetings with collectors and critics. But when he opened the door, there was no one in sight. Instead, there was a small package lying on his doorstep, wrapped in brown paper and tied with a thin string. Curious but cautious, James brought the package inside and carefully untied the string. Inside, he found a small note. It was brief and written in a hurried, jagged hand. The key is in the paintings, but you are not the only one looking. You are being watched. Trust no one. James' stomach dropped as he read the note again. His mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Who was watching him? And what did the message mean? The paintings, of course, they were the key. But what was the key to? And why was someone warning him now? The message left more questions than answers, and James felt a chill run down his spine. For the first time, the gravity of his father's hidden legacy truly hit him. This was no longer just about art, it was about something bigger, something that could change the world. And there were people willing to do whatever it took to control it. James didn't waste time. He immediately called Davenport, hoping the older man could shed some light on the situation. But when Davenport didn't answer, James felt a surge of anxiety. The message had felt too personal, too specific. And the fact that Davenport wasn't picking up only deepened his unease. It was then that James realized how much he had relied on Davenport. The older man had been his guide, his mentor through the maze of his father's hidden world. But now, James felt entirely alone. Determined to take control of the situation, James decided to follow the only lead he had, the paintings. If the key was hidden within them, then it was up to him to figure out what his father had left behind. But there was a problem. His father had never explained the meaning of the symbols, nor had he left any explicit instructions on how to interpret them. James had only discovered the cryptic connections between the paintings and the ancient civilization by accident. Now, he would have to rely on his own instincts and the clues his father had woven into the art. He spent the next few nights in his studio, surrounded by his father's paintings, meticulously studying each one. The ancient symbols and shapes, which once seemed like abstract elements of his father's creativity, now revealed themselves as part of a complex puzzle. Each painting held a piece of the puzzle, a clue that led to the next. Some symbols were repeated, while others were scattered across different pieces, linked together in ways that James could barely comprehend. As the hours passed, James grew increasingly obsessed. He knew that he was close, but the breakthrough eluded him. Every time he thought he was on the verge of understanding, a new layer of complexity emerged, pulling him deeper into a web of history and mystery. It wasn't until the fourth night, when exhaustion was beginning to cloud his judgment, that James finally made the connection. One of his father's most intricate paintings, a large, chaotic piece filled with vibrant colors and swirling shapes, suddenly clicked. James had always thought it was a representation of a natural disaster, something his father had witnessed in his travels. But now, with fresh eyes, he saw it differently. The swirling patterns were not just chaotic forms, they were the schematic layout of an ancient city, a city lost to history. As he stared at the painting, something inside him clicked. This wasn't just a painting, it was a map. A map to the ancient civilization his father had uncovered, and perhaps the very place where the secrets of their past lay hidden. But the question was, where exactly was this city? And how could he find it? In that moment, a realization struck James like a lightning bolt. His father's paintings weren't just artistic expressions, they were coordinates, pointing to a physical location. The symbols were pieces of a greater puzzle, and the map hidden within the artwork was leading him towards something far more dangerous than he could ever have imagined. As the night wore on, James felt the weight of his discovery settle over him. He wasn't just an artist anymore, he was a seeker of truths long buried, a protector of knowledge that could change the world. But as he looked at the paintings surrounding him, the shadow of danger loomed larger than ever before. He knew he wasn't the only one searching for these secrets. And those who were after them wouldn't hesitate to do whatever it took to stop him. The next day, with a renewed sense of purpose, James decided to take the first step in uncovering the truth. He contacted Olivia, explaining the breakthrough he had made, and asked for her help. She had proven herself to be a reliable ally in the past, and now, more than ever, he needed someone he could trust. But when Olivia responded, her tone was strange. "James," she said, "I've been trying to reach you. There's something you need to know. I think you found the key, but you need to be careful. There are people looking for you, people who won't stop until they get what they want." James felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. Was Olivia trying to warn him, or was she involved in something he didn't understand? The uncertainty was growing, and with it, the danger. He didn't know who to trust, but he knew one thing for sure, the chase had begun. And no matter how hard he tried, there was no escaping the shadows that were closing in on him. The days blurred into a single, relentless pursuit of truth and survival. James couldn't shake the feeling that time was slipping through his fingers. The deeper he dug into his father's art, the more dangerous his life became. The strange message he'd received, the cryptic warning from Olivia, and Davenport's ominous words were all converging into something larger than he could comprehend. He had uncovered the key to something ancient, something that others would stop at nothing to possess. James stood before his father's final painting, the map that had revealed the lost city. The city, now more of a place in his mind than a real location, was buried beneath centuries of forgotten history. Yet the symbols his father had painted were becoming clearer. The swirling patterns, the shapes that seemed abstract at first, now formed the outline of a city, its streets, its temples, and its hidden chambers, all of it waiting to be found. His father had hidden this knowledge in plain sight, within the canvas, but it was up to James to decipher it before others did. Olivia had promised to help, but her words from the previous day lingered in his mind. She had been trying to warn him. Had she been trying to protect him, or was she involved in something far darker than James could have imagined? As night fell, James sat alone in his studio, the world outside shrouded in darkness. He ran his fingers over the canvas, tracing the shapes and lines that now made sense to him. He had only a few more clues to piece together, but a sense of urgency gnawed at him. The walls of his father's legacy were closing in, and he was on the verge of discovering something world-changing, but at what cost? His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden knock at the door. James froze. His heart skipped a beat. At this hour, it could only be one of two people, Olivia or Davenport. He wasn't sure which one he was hoping for. The uncertainty about Olivia's involvement had left him cautious, but Davenport was still a man of mystery, someone whose intentions were unclear. James stood, wiped his palms on his jeans, and slowly approached the door. He peered through the peephole, his breath caught in his throat when he saw who was standing outside. It wasn't Olivia. It wasn't Davenport. Instead, standing on the doorstep was a man in a black suit, his face obscured by shadows. Behind him, James could make out two other figures, their movements deliberate and calm. Before he could react, the man in the front stepped forward, his voice smooth and almost too calm. "Mr. Williams, I believe we need to have a conversation." James instinctively stepped back, his mind racing. His thoughts flashed back to the warning on the note, "You are being watched." These men were the ones he had been warned about, the ones who would stop at nothing to get their hands on what his father had discovered. But why had they come for him now? I don't know what you want, but you're not getting anything, James said, his voice shaky but firm. He tried to keep his composure, but his instincts were telling him that he was in over his head. The man smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. Oh, Mr. Williams, you misunderstand. We're not here to take anything, yet. We're here because you've uncovered something we've been looking for, and we'd like to have a discussion about it. The words hung in the air, heavy with threat. James backed away from the door, his hand instinctively reaching for the phone on the table. But as he did, the man's voice stopped him cold. We've been watching you, Mr. Williams. We know you've found something that belongs to us. And we're not interested in your father's little art project. No, we want the knowledge. The power that lies buried in those paintings. James' stomach twisted as the gravity of the situation finally hit him. This wasn't about money, or fame, or art, it was about power. They weren't interested in his father's legacy as a work of beauty or historical significance. They wanted what it could unlock, an ancient, lost civilization, and the secrets it could provide. You're wrong, James said, his voice steadier now. You won't find anything in those paintings. They're just art. My father, he was trying to capture history, not control it. The man's smile faded, and he nodded to his companions. They moved toward the door, blocking James from escaping. Your father didn't know what he had, Mr. Williams, the man said. He thought it was just art too, but he was wrong. And now, you're the key to unlocking everything. We need you to tell us what's hidden in those paintings. James' mind raced. There was no way he could let these men get their hands on the knowledge his father had uncovered. He wasn't sure what they wanted it for, but he knew it wasn't for good. His father had warned him, even if it had been indirectly, through the symbols and the art. James wasn't going to let them exploit it. Get out, James said, his voice hardening. You'll never get anything from me. The man's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, the room seemed to grow colder. Then, without another word, he nodded to his companions, who stepped back, giving James just enough space to make a run for it. In a flash, James turned and bolted for the back door, heart pounding in his chest. He could hear their footsteps behind him, but they weren't quick enough to catch him just yet. He sprinted into the alley behind the gallery, knowing he couldn't stop, not now. Not when the danger was this real. As he ran, a thought burned through his mind. The symbols in his father's paintings were more than just a map to a hidden city, they were also a map to power. And he was the only one who could decipher them. James had a choice. He could give up the knowledge and hand it over to these men, or he could protect his father's legacy at any cost, even if it meant losing everything. His heart ached as he thought of his father. The man who had raised him, taught him, and trusted him with the most precious secret of all. But now, that secret had become a weapon, and the world was out to take it. As James sprinted into the night, he knew one thing for sure, this was only the beginning. The chase for the truth, and for power, had just begun. And it would take everything James had to survive it.